Ladies and gentlemen, heartily welcome to all of you. I'm very thankful that even if this is an extraordinary summer night, you found the way to Diplomatic Academy in order to come here and to listen to certainly an outstanding man. It's a great pleasure for me that we can present to you today Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei. A hearty welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
For me, it's also a great pleasure that he's in company of his wife, who has this wonderful first name, Aida, which certainly fits to an outstanding Egyptian statesman. It's also a great pleasure for me that our honorary president of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, our former foreign minister and EU commissioner, Benita Ferrero-Waldner, is here. And I really want to welcome her and also her husband, Ferrero Campos. At the same time, I also want to say not only thank you because he helped me organize it, but of course he also had a very prominent role in IAEA, Tariq Rauf, and thank you very much for your coming. And now I'm in the difficult situation that we have a lot of high diplomats. I'm sure I will forget a lot if I just start, Ali Soltanieh, our former Secretary General, Chief of Cabinet, our longtime ambassador, Türk, Ferdinand Maultaschl, ambassador, Botschafter, and so many others. And it's also a great pleasure for me to see Dr. Peter Haider from UPF, Dr. Rathor, and many others. I really want to say a hearty welcome to you, and I'm sure it will be an interesting evening. I do not want to talk too much before we start with the speech of Dr. ElBaradei. But certainly the past few weeks have brought a new situation. On the one hand, there was the situation that the agreement, the JCPOA revival, was more or less ready, and everybody expected already that it could be signed in Vienna within a few days. But it came in a different way. It was stopped by the war in Ukraine. And at the same time, the immediate danger, or at least theoretical danger, of a nuclear war was on the stage. Nobody could imagine such a situation just a year ago. And now we are in. And therefore, I think it really is worthwhile, not only to have a theoretical discussion, but to listen to a man who certainly is more competent than almost anybody else worldwide. It's for me a pleasure, and if you allow, Dr. ElBaradei, I just want to say a few words also. Everybody knows you in this room, but I would like also maybe to present a little bit from your life. Grown up in Egypt, studies of law at the University of Cairo, but also at the University of New York, adjunct professor of international law in New York, and then he joined the diplomatic service of Egypt and made his career with, stayed in New York and in Geneva and in many places. After a few years, he left the diplomatic service of his country and he went to United Nations. And everybody knows he became the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And in this function, he played a role of quite some importance. This was a crucial period when nobody really could pre-tell what would happen worldwide. Distribution of nuclear weapons and also the danger during the period of Cold War of the outbreak of a nuclear war. And he managed this in a way that everybody just, could admire the way he did it. Of course, he also got quite some reputation at home. He became vice president, and everybody hoped, at least in this room, that the president's role in Egypt would have been in your hands. But okay, politics are different. And insofar, we have the privilege to host you here in Vienna. It's a great pleasure for me, and I just once again want to welcome you, Dr. ElBaradei, from my whole heart. And I just want to ask you just to start your speech and to tell us everything you are thinking about the situation and about your perspectives of the nowadays global situation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fasslabend, for your very kind introduction. And I'm very pleased, of course, to have so many friends and colleagues here. This is a difficult time, and I don't think anybody has a hold on the truth. I mean, nor can we really see with any clarity the future. But I will just try to give you some of my reflections in terms of background I see in terms of what we can do, which is important looking to the future. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak to the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, especially during a very turbulent and critical time for the security of Europe and indeed the world. In 1952, the American statesman Adlai Stevenson said, and I quote, "We are now on the eve of great decisions, not easy decisions, but a long, patient, costly struggle, which alone can assure triumph over the great enemies of man: war, poverty, and tyranny, and the assault upon human dignity, which are the most grievous consequences of each." Unquote. 7 decades later, we still find humanity's greatest enemies alive and kicking, very much so. Would like first to assess with you how we dealt with these enemies, because they are at the heart of the question we are discussing today: global security, or rather, insecurity. Wars, the evil Antonio Guterres recently referred to in Kiev with grave and desperation when he said, "War is evil," have dominated the human timeline since recorded history. Hundreds of millions have lost their lives to violence under the guise of religion, nationalism, ethnicity, and other casus belli. We organize ourselves around city-state, empires, and sovereign states. We created the League of Nations and the United Nations. But force and violence continue to be our preferred choice to settle differences. And peace remains elusive or transient at best. The human condition has become more absurd and contradictory, in my view. Despite the huge leap forward in science and technology, which we see every day, we have failed to translate these advances into actions to achieve peace and security. Every day is a testament, in one way or another, of how high we can go or soar, and at the same time, how low we can fall. Today, around 100 armed conflicts are going on. 100 armed conflicts are going on. And I think 60 states are involved in this. And that number is on the rise. Senseless, destructive, dehumanizing conflicts. A mindset of Carthago delenda est. Let us destroy Carthage, the Roman famous dictum. The war in Ukraine is the latest gruesome example. It is always, unfortunately, the civilians who foot the bill, cynically labeled as collateral damage. But beyond the ongoing human misery, one of the most frightening developments of the Ukraine war, which Dr. Fasslabend I just referred to, has been the reintroduction of nuclear weapons as a central component of geopolitics. The frequent and loose reference to the use of nuclear weapons is something we haven't seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when we teetered on the precipice of nuclear conflagration. This is dreadful regression. Let us remember that these are weapons. To quote the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the ban treaty, weapons whose catastrophic consequences cannot be adequately addressed, transcend national borders, pose grave implications for human survival, the environment, socio-economic development, the global economy, food security, and health of current and future generation, unquote. In other words, the risk of ending life as we know it. But to understand why we reach this inflection point, let me go back to Stevenson's great enemies, war, poverty, and tyranny. A quick reality check shows that we are failing miserably on all three fronts. Almost 700 million people live in extreme poverty, and nearly half the world population struggles to meet basic needs, half the world population. Some conflicts have been left to fester for generations. Well, can mention Korea, Palestine, and many other generations. While we have mostly confined ourselves to hand-wringing, as millions of civilians were being killed. You can just mention the million people who died on Rwanda, for example. Brutal repression and denial of basic human dignity are the hallmark of 1/3 of the world nations. Was the response of the international community to abuse of human rights largely limited to a feeble expression of deep concern? This was in great measure the outcome, in my view, of the obscene inequality we witness amongst countries and people. Some recent examples. We spend less than 1% of what we spend on armament. We spend this year $2 trillion in armaments. On humanitarian assistance, less than 1%. And we continue even to complain it's too much. Some of the rich countries continue to complain it's too much the assistance we provide. We continue to witness a vaccine apartheid, complete apartheid. I think it's 77% of the EU, we are fully vaccinated, triple, quadruple, I've been quadruple vaccinated. While in Africa, I think it's like 13%. It's 13%. And why refugees from Ukraine are met with open arms as one of us, and we continue to actually, in fact, compete who is more generous vis-à-vis the Ukrainian refugees. And rightly so, absolutely, wonderful. But those from Africa and the Middle East and other places are left to drown or placed in appalling detention camps in Libya and many other places. Sadly, Pope Francis' appeal, and he's a great man, continuing appealing to the gospel sense of morality, went completely unheeded. Completely unheeded. Even when Angela Merkel, Wir schaffen das, what happened? It resulted in her diminishing popularity, because she dared to ask to accept some refugees who are running from famine and just killing, basically. Many are unable to realize that poverty, repression, and inequality are not simply moral questions. They are not moral questions. They are, in reality, lethal weapons, invariably compounded by and resulting in human rights abuses, lack of good governance, marginalization, and a deep sense of injustice. A combination that creates a fertile breeding ground for violence, extremism, and many threats, many threats, weapons of mass destruction, communicable diseases, climate change, cybersecurity, terrorism, human trafficking, and illegal drugs, and I can go on. But these are all, we should remember, threats without borders. They have no borders. In fact, COVID-19 is just a reminder. And no one country, no matter how powerful, can deal with any of them on its own. None. And no part of the world can be quarantined any longer. Again, Ukraine is just with us. Our international institutions, where Benita and I come from, are designed for times past, have become polarized and paralyzed, suffering from structural deficiencies and lack of authority and resources. I look at Antonio Guterres nowadays, and as a representative of what we have built in 1945, and I feel, I don't know how I feel. It's just an awful feeling that the UN, the entire UN has become, or the multilateral institutions have become irrelevant, to say in a euphemistic term. One result is, of course, a dysfunctional system of collective security, a glaring manifestation of which is the Russia-Ukraine war. The failure of the UN Security Council to take preventive measures or provide adequate responses in most conflicts due to the veto power has rendered it progressively impotent, completely impotent, leaving conflict to deteriorate, violence to rage, and misery to spread. We keep talking about a rule-based system, and that's important to me and Ambassador Turk and others who are lawyers. But this rule-based system is currently in deep trouble, in crisis. International humanitarian law intended to reduce the savagery of war, or at least make it, why should I say, a little bit civilized wars, is now cited more in terms of violation. I see my friend, the president of the ICRC, every single day in desperate situations. They just want to be able to feed the hungry or help the wounded, and they can't. The responsibility to protect principle, which we articulated in 2005 with a lot of fanfare to enable the international community to guard against genocide, war crimes, and crime against humanity, now mostly rings hollow. Nobody even talks about it. And cases before the International Criminal Court, which some countries now remembered, are confined to the weak and defeated, with many major powers not even party to the court statutes to begin with. I think neither Russia or the US or China or India, for example. None, right? Yeah. The International Court of Justice ruling last March that Russia, quote, must immediately suspend the military operation in Ukraine. This is a decision by the International Court of Justice in March. It was completely ignored. Nobody even talks about it. This is the top judicial organ of the whole system we built. For a lawyer who continue to believe in the value and centrality of the rule of law, this growing cavalier irrelevance of international law, is depressing. But more important, it portends chaos, a world without rules, or any society without rules. It's turning into complete chaos. And that's what we are seeing gradually happening. Against this backdrop of global disorder, it should not come as a surprise that we still have 13,000 nuclear weapons. How many do you have, Ali?
As much as you like.
Around 2,000 of them on high alert status. High alert status, again, I don't want to, means that, and this is from the US authorities, 7 to 8 minutes before you can respond to a purported nuclear attack. 7 to 8 minutes. This is from Secretary of Energy of the US, Senator Nunn, 7 to 8 minutes. Because they are on high alert status since the Cold War, never changed. In plain terms, this means that a nuclear weapon launch, intentionally, accidentally, due to miscalculation, cyber manipulation, or simply through an act of madness, as JFK once mentioned, simply an act of madness, remains a constant existential threat. The entry into force of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970 was a milestone in collective awareness of the need to control the proliferation of nuclear weapons, with a view to their eventual elimination. The 5 recognized weapon states under the treaty, China, France, Russia, UK, US, committed themselves in 1970 to, quote, pursue negotiation in good faith relating to the cessation of nuclear arms race at an early date and to nuclear disarmament, unquote. That is the NPT language. In return, all non-nuclear weapon states party permitted themselves not to acquire nuclear weapons and to subject all the nuclear activities to the verification system of the International Atomic Energy Agency. 3 states, India, Israel, Pakistan, saw the NPT as discriminatory and does not serve their security interests and decided not to join, but to develop their own nuclear arsenal. North Korea, which is another story, while initially joining the treaty in the 80s, declared its withdrawal in 2003 and went on also to develop its own nuclear weapons. So we have 9 of them. But what is really disturbing is that after more than 5 decades of assuming their disarmament obligation, all the 5 nuclear weapon state parties to the treaty are moving completely in the opposite direction from disarmament. In fact, all 9 nuclear armed states China, France, India, Israel, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, the UK, and the US are all in a race to modernize their arsenals. Even more ominous is that, in addition to Russia and the US, some of them are developing usable nuclear weapons, the so-called low-yield, tactical, whatever, usable, little nuclear weapon we can use, are availing themselves of new cyber and artificial intelligence technologies, as well as advanced sci-fi hypersonic missile, which we read about it every day. This is going on despite the fact that almost all prominent strategic experts have argued strongly that reliance on nuclear weapons is becoming, quote, increasingly hazardous and decreasingly effective. That is the language of, in 2007, of Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Bill Perry, and Sam Nunn. In the four of them, in 2007, said nuclear weapons are decreasingly effective and increasingly hazardous. In 2011, former US Secretary of Defense Bill Perry, a good man who believed in disarmament, talked about three false alarms he knew of in which Soviet missiles were mistakenly thought to be screaming toward the US. He said, and this is quote, "To this day," this is Bill Perry, Secretary of US Defense, "to this day, I believe that we avoided nuclear catastrophe as much by good luck as by good management." So we managed to continue to be alive because of our good luck. The argument that nuclear weapons have kept the peace does not, in my view, withstand any scrutiny. It's a fragile and perilous peace that hinges on the threat of mutual assured destruction. A doctrine described in 1988 by Rajiv Gandhi, the then Prime Minister of India, as, quote, "the ultimate expression of the philosophy of terrorism, holding humanity hostage to the presumed security needs of a few," unquote. Of course, India tried for a number of years not to go nuclear, did not see anybody disarming, so they joined the camp, and followed by Pakistan. It's a peace based on the colonial premise, if you look at it, this assured destruction. It's based on the colonial premise that some are more equal than others, and on do as I say, not as I do. It is not only unjust, but also, in my view, unsustainable. That some countries possess them or are protected by them within an alliance, while asking others not to have them, including, of course, neutral countries like Austria or Switzerland, or who believe in multilateralism. Yeah? They are told you cannot have them. But we in NATO, of course, or if we are covered by an umbrella, we are shielded. This is, in my view, is an oxymoron in the long term. As I often mention, you cannot ask somebody to quit smoking while you are dangling a cigarette from your mouth. I think the Nobel Committee was impressed by this statement. They gave me the Nobel Committee for this statement. You can't. It's just the discriminatory nature is just so awful, and you cannot sustain this. The reality is that we are living under a Damocles' sword hanging by thread. The fact also is that the very existence of nuclear weapons bears the seeds of their proliferation, because they continue to be perceived, rhetoric aside, as the ultimate security deterrence and a major source of power and influence. You hear Zelensky today saying, I wish we didn't give up nuclear weapon. You see North Korea, you see many others. If you want to be secure, forget about this. Let's have a nuclear shield, a nuclear posture, as they like to say. With the technology out of the box, we should not be surprised if some, particularly those in areas of conflict, look at the Middle East today, will rethink their security posture. 2 countries in Europe already, Finland and Sweden, you read today, they said, we're moving. We're going under one of the nuclear umbrellas. And already taking steps in that direction. Nor should it be difficult to understand that every state, irrespective of its political system, whether it's democracy, whether it's autocracy, whatever, irrespective of the system, will do whatever it takes to protect itself against any perceived threat. North Korea, rightly or wrongly, feel they are under attack, they will develop nuclear weapons. That is irrespective of whatever the system. In the early 60s, President Kennedy predicted that by the mid-70s, 10 or 20 countries would have nuclear weapons. I wonder if we are now about to fulfill his prophecy. The Ukraine war brought to the forefront some blunt lessons, in my view, regarding global security and nuclear weapons. The first is that the possible use of nuclear weapons cannot be ruled out in a long, drawn, and unpredictable war. And we keep counting our blessing, basically, but we are not ruling that out. The second is that a country may seriously think of acquiring nuclear weapons or a nuclear shield if it wants to protect its sovereignty and territory from possible attack, Sweden and Finland. And the third is that there are currently 2 classes of countries in terms of security. The A-list, like in Hollywood, the A-list, secure under a nuclear umbrella, and the B-list, that are countries who are vulnerable to bullying. The world today is split into a majority of countries that want to eliminate nuclear weapons. At least the 122 countries who concluded the Nuclear Ban Treaty, and a minority of nuclear weapon states and their allies that remain wedded to the status quo. The Ban Treaty, which prohibits the possession of nuclear weapons and asks all the weapon states to negotiate the elimination of their nuclear arsenals, was the logical result of a growing realization of the catastrophic threat of nuclear weapons and, frankly, the frustration with the snail pace of nuclear disarmament. I should note with gratitude that Austria was one of the leading supporters of highlighting the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, as well as a principal initiator of the conclusion of that treaty. The international community has already prohibited biological and chemical weapons, and mines and cluster ammunitions, classes of weapons that are less lethal than nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons were, until their prohibition by the Ban Treaty, a jarring exception. Also taking into account the International Court of Justice 1996 advisory opinion, which declared that, quote, the threat or use of nuclear weapons would generally be contrary to the rules of international law applicable in armed conflicts, and in particular, the principles and rules of humanitarian law, unquote. But none of the weapon states and their allies have adopted the Ban Treaty. Instead, in fact, some of them declared that quote, they do not intend to ever become party, to ever become party. I think this was the US, France, and the UK. Yeah. Because the convention, in their view, is incompatible with the policy of nuclear deterrence, which has been essential to keeping the peace in Europe and North Asia for over 70 years, unquote. That is their statement. This is, to me, is completely baffling, because it seems to me to be rewriting history and twisting the rationale behind the NPT. Isn't it precisely the policy of nuclear deterrence that the NPT aimed to abolish when it obligated the weapon state to negotiate in good faith toward nuclear disarmament? And wasn't that obligation an essential part of the bargain, so to speak, under which all others agreed not to acquire nuclear weapons? So you don't develop nuclear weapon, but we are going also to get rid of ours. That was the bargain in 1970. And now we are being told, don't touch it, because it's very important, the nuclear deterrence. One would have expected the weapon states to initiate serious negotiation with a view to the gradual and balanced elimination of nuclear weapons, instead of this, to me, condescending and negative reaction. I still hope that the policies of the weapon states will evolve in that direction over time. A sharp global division over the very essence of collective security is dangerous to all of us. For the nuclear weapon state to reverse the escalating threat of nuclear weapons, several steps are urgently needed. First, they must scale down their current nuclear posture, including their arsenal high alert status. And you talk to many experts in the US, part of the administration, who are absolutely frightened of the continuation of that status. Second, they must eliminate any system where a single person can authorize a nuclear launch. You remember January, a couple of years ago, was President Trump in charge. Third, they should all adopt a non-first use and a sole purpose posture, meaning that their existing arsenal will only ever be used for deterrence against a nuclear attack. That's what Henry Kissinger last week, who is not soft on defense, were arguing, in fact, in Washington, that accept defeat, even a nuclear weapon state should accept defeat rather than use nuclear weapons. And he gives the example of the US and Russia's defeat in Afghanistan. Concurrently, a number of measures are also needed to move the nuclear disarmament agenda forward. These include bringing the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, concluded in 1996 into force, 25 years ago. Concluding a fissile material cut-off treaty to prohibit the further production of uranium and plutonium for nuclear weapons. We continue to churn off material that are ready to be used in nuclear weapons. In 2003, as a Director General of the IAEA, I advocated for a multilateral approach to the sensitive part of the fuel cycle, uranium enrichment and plutonium separation, by bringing it completely under international control. The LEU Bank, we managed at least to have an LEU Bank, low-enriched uranium bank in Kazakhstan, owned and operated by the IAEA, which is the first step in that direction. But much more needed in that regard, and nothing, unfortunately, is moving in that direction. Importantly, in all this, the US and Russia, which together account for approximately 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, need to resume their bilateral arms reduction negotiation beyond the New START treaty, which still allows each one of them to have 1,550, if I recall, Tarek, right? Yeah. To be joined to be joined at an appropriate stage by all other weapon states. Ideally, they should all agree to simultaneously join the Nuclear Ban Treaty together once they jointly formulate a nuclear disarmament plan. You, 9 of you, get together, agree on how you develop a plan for nuclear disarmament, and then go to the ban treaty. If you are really true to your commitment under the NPT, which, in my view, the ban treaty is simply complementary to the ban treaty. In parallel, we need to start formulating the global security architecture of a nuclear weapon-free world. We all talk about getting rid of nuclear weapons, but we're not really talking much about what does this world look like without nuclear weapons, how we are going to protect our security without nuclear weapons. And that's where something like the Vienna Diplomatic Academy can get engaged, including, naturally, the need to deter and defeat possible cheats. There will be cheats, and we need to have a system. We need to have a system to protect ourselves, but we're not doing that. We just simply continue to assume that we still live with nuclear weapons, despite all our rhetoric. Nuclear weapons are an existential threat anywhere and everywhere, regardless on whose hands, whether it's a democracy or a dictatorship. It's a threat to everybody. One of the main reasons states seek to acquire nuclear weapons is a sense of insecurity. I've seen that in real experience everywhere, in North Korea, for example, when there is a deep sense of insecurity, whether you agree or not agree, there is a deep sense of insecurity. Dialogue and engagement have proven to be the best way to reduce distrust and build confidence. There's no other way. The past breakthrough in DPRK and Iran nuclear programs, for example, were achieved through diplomacy, not pressure, and sanctions, which are often counterproductive and result in maximum resistance instead of cooperation. Aside from all the other stuff, the people in charge get rich. I mean, there's a lot of horrible stuff comes from applying sanctions. I remember a good friend of mine, Stephen Bosworth, who was the US ambassador and in charge of North Korea. And I remember a few years ago, he told me, when you apply sanctions, that means you have no policy. When you are short of policy, go and apply sanctions. God rest his soul. Some have started to draw a parallel between the world today and that of the 1930s in terms of exclusionary and polarized societies, insurgent populism, economic crisis, refugees, institutional failures, and flouting international norms. These are all hanging around with us. But we must learn from history, I hope. We must learn from history. We are reaching, in my view, a fork in the road, and time is not on our side. We must create a new environment and cultivate a new mindset for our shared humanity, including a fresh approach to governance modalities and institutions, national and international. We have a crisis of governance, both at the national level and at the international level. Awful crisis of governance, but that's a different issue. Peace and security should be a collective effort, and not us versus them, and not one alliance against nobody. That is not it. Peace and security should be collective effort based on equity, trust, dialogue, and solidarity, not on threats and double standards. In our globalized world, we will always remember that we will either swim together or think one after the other. I still, maybe in my old age, hope that our history, experience, and common sense will guide us sometime to where we need to be. Thank you.
Dr. ElBaradei, thank you so much for your presentation. And I think when you pointed out that, especially at the beginning, that peace is not a question of, just a relationship between neighbors, but the basis for peace and stability is elimination of poverty, of inequality, and other factors. I think this is not only important, this also shows very clearly, that the fact that you and your agency got the Peace Nobel Prize was not just by chance, but your theory is quite important. Yeah, you used the expression of usable nuclear weapons. Maybe you can tell us a little bit how you see this fact at the moment. Before then, I will ask our auditory to ask a few questions.
Sure. Well, thank you. This is not really my area very much, the weapons, my area, but what I know about it, that now in the US, and Russia at least, Tarek, they have developed the so-called low-yield tactical usable nuclear weapon. So it's something smaller than what has been used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example. So you can, localized, you can use it. It will not lead to the end of the world, but you can use it to show that you are not going to surrender, or your existence is required that you put a different card on the table. What I know, what I read at least, that this is now is part of the Russian doctrine. But again, that is based on my reading, that if they feel that they are into a corner, their military doctrine is to escalate in order to de-escalate, because they feel they are not on par in terms of with the conventional weapons. So if they are stuck, use a small nuclear weapon, so the other party should come to their senses and we can de-escalate. This is all, as I said, is all what one reads and all what the experts are saying. But do you ever think that once you use a nuclear weapon, that it will stop at that? I mean, do we have any guarantee that in the middle of anger and war, that somebody use nuclear weapon, that the other will not say, well, I'll double down on you. And then soon, we are no longer there. So the idea also of a small usable nuclear weapon is completely against this concept of nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence is mutual assured destruction. If you ever use it, we are both going to hell, obviously, nowhere else. But if we use it, we are going to hell. But that's now is something else. Now, Hiroshima, some of you have gone to Hiroshima or Nagasaki, I mean, you have to see, the impact, not just the people who died, the people who have been exposed to radiation, and this is like 70 years after. But we, as human beings, I think we have a short memory, so we forgot about all the awful stuff we have done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so now we say, well, let us go back again merrily and use some of these small nuclear weapons, not understanding that once you go that road, there is no end to it. Once you start thinking of using these horrible weapons, there is no end to it. And if you are going to use it, what do you think about the 192 countries around the world? Are they going to sit, quietly, politely and say, well, you please can use it, but we are not going to develop nuclear weapons because we are under a treaty that tells us not to develop nuclear weapons. They will tell you, which language I do not want to use. Go to hell, basically. Go to hell. We are going to protect our security. Politely, if you can, like Sweden and Finland, and if you are not part of the civilized NATO alliance, well, then maybe I'll develop a different alliance, maybe I'll work on my own. Are we going to have a world based on alliances again? I mean, we had this awful NATO-Warsaw alliances, and we thought that's the end of it in 1989. Are we now moving now or forcing people to say, if I'm not part of NATO, maybe let me go and look some of our neighbors and develop our own alliance? So we'll have 4 or 5 alliances equipped with the real weapons, the muscle weapons, nuclear weapons. It's, when you think of what is happening, it's just mad. It's just mad, frankly, in my view, at least.
Yeah, of course, one can discuss a lot about such a question. I guess there are many questions in the room, and I see already the first hand. Please, Benita, if you are so nice.
The reality is so different. In the end, I think we are I would say I'm in a very pessimistic mood, because I see just the contrary of what you have described. So who would be the person, or who would be the leaders who get together to have this security, this collective security, and the idea to refresh the Security Council, refresh the old great ideas of United Nations? I think that in the moment I don't see at all. And therefore I ask you, where do you think we could even start? If I see the situation today, I mean, indeed, it could be possible that Russia uses these usable tactical nuclear weapons with a terrible outcome. But I also see, and I saw the other day, a very interesting interview and also a sort of information on China. China now is the first military sea power already. So I could imagine that in 5-6 years, now seeing what goes on in Russia and Ukraine, they will go and invade Taiwan. And then we have a horrible scenario there. And also you have North Korea, who could now also go against South Korea. So I see everywhere in the world, also in the Middle East, of course, huge potential for more aggression and not less aggression. What has to be done in order to make such a collective security at least feasible in the future? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Benita. And I am as optimistic as pessimistic as you are. I mean, Ida would tell you that this, in last couple of weeks ago, I said, this is the first time in my life I feel that sense of pessimism. Mm-hmm. Even with all what we have gone through, Iran, Iraq, I never felt that we are stuck, that we are in a state of mind where we do not see a way out. I think I agree with you. I mean, somebody has to start. I mean, in ideal situation, it should have been the UN who have taken the stand. I remember in 1955, Dag Hammarskjöld, when he went to China in the middle of, and he said, I'm coming here as the standard bearer of the UN Charter. I don't care about the member state. That was amazing, but that was 1955. I'm not blaming the UN, because the UN is told, thank you, stay away. I believe if we go anywhere, we have 3 major powers right now, or 2 really major powers, China and the US. And of course, the US with the European Union and Russia. These people have sense of responsibility, and they have to ask themselves the fundamental question. Are we going to be able to survive if we continue this confrontation? If we continue to say, your domestic policies are horrible, we are the standard bearer of democracy, we are going to defeat Russia in the Ukraine until they say uncle. That's one mindset. Another mindset to say, and you have seen that very much, this is the world, it's not ideal, it's not great, it's a lot of things we need to improve. Horrible dictators, horrible inequality, but we have to deal with the cards in our hand. And the card in our hand to say, the only way forward is to see how we can get ourselves out of this mess. This morning I was looking at the NATO-Russia Council. Surprisingly, there was a NATO-Russia Council, still exists, which in 2002 was established on equal terms. That's what it says, that NATO and Russia will deal with each other on equal terms. It's not 28 plus 1, we are all equal. So that was in 2002, but it stopped in 2014 after the Crimea. Well, you stop it, but then what else did you have? What else did you have? I mean, at least from my little experience, don't see, even if you hate the other side, you still have to talk. There is no other way. And particularly if the other has weapons that can destroy the whole world, I mean, in the last couple of years, when we saw 2 years ago, when Nancy Pelosi and others were absolutely frightened that the US president might use nuclear weapons because he has sole authority. He can order nuclear weapons. When we see now Ukraine, everybody is talking now about maybe we can use nuclear weapons, small, large, hydrogen, whatever. We have, if we want to survive, let us at least agree to talk instead of fight. Nobody's going to win a war. And it's horrible if somebody loses a war. And particularly if somebody loses a war where he or she is equipped with nuclear weapons. You don't want anybody to go mad, frankly. You don't want anybody to feel humiliated to the point that they go mad. Whoever, I'm talking in general. That's not the great situation. The great situation to say, all right, we have a lot of disagreement, injustice, unfairness, violation of human rights, whatever, economic inequality, trade disputes. But let's find a way, because I mean, I see right now, we're all talking here, getting nicely dressed, living in beautiful Vienna, but we have two existential issues. One is a climate change, where we all know that we're not doing enough, that we'll not reach the 1.5 or even 2, and despite all our talk, despite all the young people talking about. And the other one is a nuclear holocaust. And on these two issues, we know we are doomed if we don't do something, and we are not doing that. But Benita, you and I and others are in the mercy of the big powers, in the mercy of those who can change the situation. My view, no matter what, you need the US, the European Union, Russia, China, to sit together for 2 years, talk. I don't want to hear from you, but talk until we find some armistice, some truce. So at least avoid this situation when we are threatened every single day, and save our environment, and then continue to fight, whatever. But let us just keep this planet we have, leave it for whoever is going to come after us.
Yeah, I think everybody is realizing that we do not have a real instrument, but what I personally see is, in such a situation, when one of the powers that is heavily responsible, one of the two powers with the biggest number and so on, is threatening with usable nuclear weapons, there must be a worldwide protest against it. Just, the announcement of a possibility as such is something that I could not tolerate anyhow, because otherwise everybody will have the right.
Ideally, that's what we should have. But that's not what's happening. There's a lot of support for Russia, for China, in the third world. And you talk to them, and they tell you, have you forgotten Iraq? Have you forgotten Afghanistan? Have you forgotten Vietnam? Ideally, but chickens, as they say, chickens are coming home to roost. Everybody is bringing back their own grievances. Ideally, we should have one united world, we say, basically, that's what I'm idealistic. I say we're one human family, irrespective of religion and all this different stupid colors and stuff. We are one. But that's not what's happening. We are now full of hate. We're trying to find reason to hate each other, rather than try to find common ground. And I agree with you, but the language you're talking about, Dr. Fasslabend, is the European American language. We are absolutely, and people who know, yes, absolutely. But others are saying, well, it's about time that the US there's a lot of grievances. And that's part of the dialogue that should be launched. We need to reach out. We need to reach out to the other. If you are in Africa, all right, and you have seen that you haven't been vaccinated, for example, and you are dying like a fly, because you are poor, why would you care about any of this? You would say, let us bring the temple down. I have nothing to lose. So it's, again, I always see inequality to be the worst thing that's happening in our world right now. The worst thing when you see that, the inequality in richness, the inequality in everything. When you have, I think, 28 people, 28 people owns as much as half the world population. 28 billionaires owns as much as 3.5 billion people. Is that how did we reach that situation? And then, if we have reached that situation, then we should try to understand why did we reach to that, as I said, inflection point. And you cannot just say, Russia is threatening us, horrible. Yes, anybody who's talking about nuclear weapon, horrible. But let us try to see why we have reached that. Why did we reach the situation from 2002, when we had this NATO-Russia acting together as partners? And they say that, as partners, into today when we are talking about using nuclear weapons. And so it's not black and white. And everyone, I think everyone should have a soul search. Nobody is 100% right, nobody is 100% wrong. There is a soul search that all of us, in all modesty, need to take. And we are not doing that. I look at Austria, who's my home now. Why are we now, I find, because you are a neutral country, you are left out. And you were relying, like Switzerland. I was talking to Micheline Calmeret the other day, the former president of Switzerland. You are left out. The countries like Russia and like Switzerland and Austria, because you are relying on the collective security system of the United Nations. you are not part of an alliance, and you rely for your security on the global system. And all of a sudden you discover today that the global system is not there. I mean, when I hear President Biden saying, we cannot go into Ukraine because they're not part of NATO. But if anybody touch any single inch of NATO territory, we will be there. This is, again, the A list and the B list, you know. But this is in Hollywood. It's not here. It's not in security. You know, we need a system that everybody feel protected, feel that they have their concern, their insecurities addressed. And that's not there. And that's what we need to, I mean, these big elephants in the room need to talk to each other. I need to understand that this is not going to continue. And, you know, if they continue this way, everybody, including them, would lose. Everybody would lose. I mean, they are even society. When I look at democracy, although that's a difference, democracy is under attack everywhere. Democracy is not able to deliver in many ways. I mean, countries are completely divided down the middle right now. Even the US, you look at the US, it is 2 US. In Europe, look at the division everywhere. That's not, why is this happening? Why do we have the extreme right, you know, coming? Why in France, the extreme right getting 44% in France? Yeah, so we have issues. We have issues, and we have to put it on the table. But these people need to put it on the table. The big elephant, the 4 big elephant need to sit together, close the door, and don't come out until they find a solution.
Okay. Ambassador in the first row.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Just a moment. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. ElBaradei. Very inspiring talk, I must say. In my diplomatic career, I've been through many stages, including the Conference on Disarmament in the 90s. It's not when I see what's happening nowadays in the Ukraine, in Russia, that I find that the world has become different. Unfortunately, I must say, and I was a silly young man at that point, that when we talked about nuclear disarmament in Geneva at that time, I was joking with my military attaché, saying, the moment we announce that we have hidden nuclear weapons in the Alps, they will start to listen to us. Yeah. In reality, we were not heard. We relied on our own narrative, as you say, that we are somehow protected by a status of neutrality. But in reality, I think neither myself nor my colleagues from other European and countries really believed in that. And since we are caught in the narrative, and we lawyers, we are of course very much grateful to the narrative that has been given to us by the United Nations, the Charter, and so on. I read recently the novel of Ken Follett, Never, which describes the start of a nuclear war between the US and China. And he says in his novel, it's a basic law of international relations that governments fulfill their treaty obligations only when it suits them. What is your take on that, Mr. Dr. ElBaradei? I see that we are in a terrible dilemma. And then allow me to quote another author, surprisingly, Miss Hillary Clinton, who recently wrote a book, State of Terror. The book describes a nuclear attack on the world by terrorist organizations and nuclear terrorism. So I would be grateful to you if you could tell me your take, your assessment of the situation of a nuclear catastrophe that could happen not by a nation state, but through a terrorist organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe we'll take another one at the same time. Yeah, yes, please.
Director General, I would like to pursue this discussion under a specific aspect. Now, as you said, Putin has threatened Ukraine and also NATO countries with nuclear bombs. And I think that these threats has put Ukraine and the NATO states in the situation of self-defense. When you are in the situation of self-defense, you may do what is appropriate. So against a nuclear threat, you build nuclear bombs. In other words, Putin, in threatening the Ukraine and in threatening the NATO states, has undermined and in effect contributed to destroy the NPT. The NPT is not a perfect agreement, but I think, despite its shortcomings, it's better than everything else which we presently have. So all states should be interested in conserve and maintain the NPT. So I think that this question of that Putin is undermining and destroying the NPT should be discussed in the Security Council as well as in the governing board of the IAEA, because this should be an unacceptable thing for all member states.
Thank you. Maybe a third one, Dr. Rato, over there in the middle.
Thank you very much, Director General, for a very informative session. My question is invasion of Iraq in 2003. At that time, it was known that there is no weapon of mass destruction, and yet the invasion took place, which gave the birth to ISIS, as well as destruction of Iraq, Libya, Syria. Million people got killed. Don't you think that IAEA should have voiced their concern very loudly and clearly that there is no weapon of mass destruction existing there, and we would have probably saved millions of people at that time? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, please, Doctor.
Maybe I start with the last question. I mean, I think this was an illegal war launched by the US and the UK, while the inspectors did not finish their work. I mean, we needed, and we said that we need a couple of months, few months to finish the work, but it was a war outside the United Nations. And if you look at the history, which is like 11, 12 years of inspection and complication, you will understand that, and to be also on fair, I mean, Iraq initially had chemical and biologicals that they had to disarm, and they started developing a nuclear program. So it took time to get rid of that, but we were, of course, on the right direction. And when the war were launched, there was no reason at all, and we haven't seen at that time anything left that required a war. But that is something had nothing to do. In fact, that nothing to do with Security Council was on the right side. The inspections, IAEA, everybody was on the right side. But when you have two major nuclear weapon states launching a war, and I agree. I mean, the war in Iraq resulted in a horrible situation. I mean, Barack Obama said that this Iraq war was the result of the ISIS, you know. And I remember what he said: when you shoot, make sure you target correctly. I mean, but a bit late, you know. But that's what I said. We need to learn from history. You know, we just do not go into situation without understanding the repercussions. I think you can talk against Putin, against the NPT, I mean, this is all happening, Walter, but the NPT, you know, I mean, when you ask about the NPT, you should ask about why 50 years after the NPT we still have a zero disarmament. I mean, that is not really the NPT. That you're really talking about just putting everybody in the basket, basically, the non-nuclear weapon states, including Germany. But the weapon states are sitting outside and not doing anything about it. So it is not sustainable. I mean, as I said, it's clearly not sustainable. You see in few years, you saw North Korea, you saw India, you saw Pakistan, you saw concern about Iran. I mean, it's not sustainable because, so I agree, we need to keep it. The NPT is a very important cornerstone, there is no question. So is the ban treaty. So is the ban treaty, and should be looked at as complementary rather than completely to fight each other. The weapon state saying, forget Austria, the ban treaty, and you saying, no, you should come forward. Yeah, that's not. On the question of reality, absolutely. You know, if you have nuclear weapon, you are respected. I mean, unfortunately, with all the, I've seen that with India. India was treated with this, at that for years, with benign neglect, as that the word is used to say. You know, while China was getting everything they need in terms of export and import, then India developed nuclear weapon. There was a whole hullabaloo for a while, but then India's treatment has completely changed. Same probably with Pakistan. No, that is, again, it's when you have, and that lesson is not lost on countries like North Korea. It's not lost in countries like Korea. But how, I think that's how, Benita, and you raised the question, the fundamental, how do you get these countries understand that them sitting here and everybody sitting here is not going to continue, is not sustainable, and that having a world based on confrontation with the horrible weapons we have, I mean, forget also about the new biological weapon, is not sustainable. You cannot, even if you are China, I mean, is China, ready to, under whatever pretext, to be destroyed by nuclear weapon? Is the US ready to be destroyed by nuclear weapon? I mean, everybody is losing. I mean, I think it's a lose-lose situation when I see it right now. It's a lose-lose situation. And we need to get ourselves out of that. But could we wake up tomorrow and see a nuclear weapon launch? Yes, we can, unfortunately. I mean,
okay.
The terrorists, again, luckily so far, what you hear is that there is a good nuclear security, that weapons are protected. But are they really protected? I mean, as I think was said once, it is impossible until it happens, I think that is, and the more danger that terrorists can get their hand on radioactive material more than nuclear weapon, and that's still quite bad. Of course, that's you can completely destabilize or destroy cities by itself by radiation. I mean, I've seen just Chernobyl, and this is a small thing, but that is more likely. But again, could anybody say there is 100% guarantee that terrorists will not get their hand on nuclear weapon? And how do you define terrorist? How do you define? Maybe terrorists become part of a government somewhere, as a so-called terrorist. I mean, so it is not easy. That's as long as you have these weapons. The risk that they will be used are a daily risk we are living with right now.
Okay, thank you. Now in the first row, Ambassador Soltania. In the second row, yeah.
Well, I commend you, Mohamed, excellent presentation. Regarding the nuclear disarmament, both of us, for years of experience, should have come to conclusion that this nuclear disarmament is the victim of nuclear arms control between Russia or Soviet Union and US. because by nuclear arms control, in fact, they legitimized their own weapon. They said we will just controlling. And this is a disaster that all non-nuclear weapon states were watching, and sometimes by reducing a couple of nuclear warheads and the announcement by these two superpowers, we were celebrating them and congratulating them. The situation now is as a result of this historical mistake. Therefore, we should not repeat the mistake to say, okay, nuclear power, big power, sit together, we just watch you, and whatever you decide, we respect you. This is the right time for uprising, and this sort of meetings of public awareness, intellectuals, and working, and even the countries, as you correctly said, the non-aligned movement countries were very active sometimes. They should now use this Ukraine crisis as a motive to restart this protest. The next point is nuclear posture review of United States. During Trump, this is a pity that many didn't notice. If you can read it carefully, I mean, I recommend to see it. It says that if US is threatened by cyber attack, it will have the right to use nuclear weapon against that country. Cyber attack that we know, it is not that technically easy to know the source of attack. It means that US has put in nuclear posture review. This kind of things I think is needs for, all of us to think twice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the second row.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, for your realistic speech. And I would like to ask you, please, if you allow me to repeat your words, how the world will look like, if there will be no nuclear weapons, in the world, and how could we, protect ourselves, which makes sense, for some countries. But allow me to ask you how the world will look like, if there will be any nuclear attacks somewhere, anywhere in the world. How about the victims? How about the civilians? How it will look like? How it will look like? And what about if the obligations of the great countries in the world against if this happened, the massive attack? How would the world will look like? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and Dr. Haider in the center over here.
I would, anyways, think it was a very profound analysis of our time. My impression is that we expect too much from politicians, that they solve all the problems of the world together with the diplomats, and we should be maybe aware that there are other like international forces which could also play some role, like the religious leaders, the artists, and the scientists, because all of them also they carry some incredible weight, and nobody really can live without them. So I think the UN, even the Secretary General, should use their force. We could see like the Pope tried as one person, but if there would be an assembly of religious leaders who try, something new might start, because a political leader, he has to serve his national interest. And normally the national interest ends where the size of the country was the biggest in history. Because if he can achieve this again, he's a great political leader. But we know this doesn't work. So what kind of role do you think that religious leaders, scientists, and like representative of culture and art could play in a serious change of the atmosphere of this global world, this global situation?
Thank you. Maybe answer those
So,
three.
on the first question, how does the world would look if somebody used nuclear weapon? I think, again, if you listen to Henry Kissinger last week in Washington, he exactly raised that point, in fact, that we never talk about what's going to happen if nuclear weapons are used. We're just talking about, this deterrence, that if you attack us, but supposedly it has been used. Have we have any scenario? We don't actually. This is part of the problem that we again, in this kind of environment, when it is, I wouldn't say plausible, but at least not unthinkable that nuclear will be used, we need to have a dialogue. What are you going to do? Do you have a plan B to take care of the victim, to take care of or even to deal with the countries that use nuclear weapons? That's not happening. That's, again, a lacuna that exists. I can't agree more with you that, and I mentioned there's a crisis of governance, and these are politicians and international civil servants. I mean, put them together. We have a problem. The world has moved in such a complicated and fast way that governments are not able to cope, and international institutions are not planned or designed to deal with it. Then you talk about civil society. I had some hope when I saw civil society in the case of climate change. Civil society, basically, who raised the issue and said, we do want a change in this climate pollution and global warming and stuff. For some reason, the issue of the nuclear threat never really picked up in terms of public opinion. I mean, people always thought maybe that's too complicated for us to get into, maybe we cannot really, but for some reason we haven't. I have been thinking exactly like, I mean, can't we have some 10, 15, 100 people, like starting with the Pope, artists, singers, everybody, 100 people who have nothing to do with politics, but basically say, we are going to shape the world opinion on this. And we are going to tell you we are not accept what's happening right now. We do not accept that for over 2 months we have a war in the heart of Europe going on, and people dying every single day. I mean, that's unthinkable. But we haven't seen that. I agree with you. I mean, I must say, the only one, and I repeat that, who have taken the lead is Pope Francis, who has, with all his authority, spiritual authority, whatever he is, but he has not been joined by any. I mean, I can imagine, if you think football players, artists, religious people get together and have a huge, and basically tell politicians, thank you, you failed. We need something else.
Maybe the Peace Nobel laureates have to gang up this.
Well, we try. I can tell you, we're trying, but there is limit to how much we can. We can. We are trying, but you need. I learn now that if you get a famous rap singer, he has 1,000 times more followers than somebody like myself or anybody else. So you need this, what they call them, influencers. You need all these influencers to come together and reach out to every single corner of the world and saying, we need a change. We just do not want to extinct. That is not what we really want. This is an absolutely, I don't know, maybe Pope Francis would start, maybe some artists would start, some, sports people would start, but I'm amazed by how much, particularly with young people. If you want to reach to the young people, like Melanie, who is no longer young, but if you want to reach young people, go to these people which I don't even know. This rap who has like 65 million followers. We need to recruit these people. We need to recruit these people because I fully agree with you. We failed at the level of politicians, at the level of we are not able to deal with the crisis we have.
Okay. Last round, I want to announce Ambassador in the last row. No, over here. Yeah, you are already here. Yes, please.
No ambassador, but journalist Stefan Löwenstein from Germany. Thank you for this inspiring discussion and insights, but I disagree. I mean, who else than politicians should rule and organize? All respect to artists and football players and religious leaders, of course. And I would add, please include Patriarch Cyril into that round of peace. But in the end, the only means to stop the war would be hard power, because there's one nuclear power that seeks to re-establish an ancient empire, and no assembly and protest and UN whatever would stop it, and even wouldn't stop the threat of the use of nuclear weapons, maybe small ones or tactical or whatever, but deterrence, nuclear deterrence in the end. And you dismissed the concept of nuclear deterrence, but I think there's no other realistic way as long as we have those nuclear bombs. Thank you.
Thank you. In the first row, Mrs. Sinegoy, and then the last two over there.
Thank you very much. Most grateful for your profound elucidation.
Thanks.
By the way, my congratulations to your rejuvenation after your appearance at Vienna City Hall as a Nobel laureate. My first question is, I was most intrigued by the sentence you uttered, if you have no solution, you apply sanctions. So, the EU at the moment has the 6th round of sanctions applied. What would be the solutions instead of sanctions? And the second question, you as a trans-Nubian, a long stronghold here in Vienna, you probably also watch the politicians of Austria. Would you suggest that Austria, like Finland and Sweden, is also altering its kind of neutrality to another version? Thank you.
I didn't hear the second question.
Yeah, whether Austria should follow more or less the Swedish and Finnish way, or what is your advice? Yeah, and now the young gentleman in the second row.
Mr. ElBaradei, thanks for coming. You said about the A-lister countries and B-lister countries, which I found very interesting. Now that there is nuclear deterrence, it's only a matter of the A-list countries, but if an A-list country uses a nuclear weapon on a B-list country, which is probably the most likely case of happening, what is about to happen? You said there is no certain protocol, but let's say hypothetical scenario that might be not so unrealistic. Russia uses one on Ukraine. Are there any measures being taken in the US that you are aware of that they might do in retaliation?
Thanks.
Okay,
all right.
The last one, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. First, it's a great honor to meet you this evening. Doctor, I'm sad I'm not a honorable guest, such an ambassador or something, but still my question is concerning the relation between civilian use of nuclear energy and military use of nuclear energy. It's thoroughly accepted that civilian use of nuclear energy can help developing a country. We think, for example, today it could be a way to help in developing African countries, but from a Western point of view, there may be this fear for undercover developing of military use of nuclear energy while officially developing civilian use. I would like to have your opinion on it. Is it a reasonable solution for today for developing countries to have civilian use of this, and do you think that the fear of undercovering developing of military use is justified? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Please.
Before I forgot all the questions. On the politician, obviously the politician has to be there. There's no question. But in a democracy, supposedly, and you guide the politician. You express displeasure with the politician, is it not? If they go into a certain direction, you have an election, and you say, I don't like this route. And I think what we were talking about now at the global level, if we see the politicians are going in a direction which we think is existential threat to us, we have the right as people, as global citizens, to say, we need some alternative, we need an option. And I think that's what we're talking about. We obviously, at the end, the politician will have to, but we're telling the politician, war is not the way. Nuclear deterrence is not the way. We want something else. But they will continue to do it. Deterrence, I mean, again, if you look at people who are on the know, who have been in the heart of deterrence, they are the first to tell you that this is a question of luck. And it's not something you want to live, or your children, or your whoever want to live in under a stroke of luck. That is, Reagan have said that, Kennedy have said that, Kissinger have said, anybody have said, this was a stopgap measure to me, nuclear deterrence. But our ingenuity, when we go to the moon and Mars we should be able to have a different system of collective security that does not depend that if I fight with you in the schoolyard, we are going to kill each other. There's no other way. That's not really the great solution, to me, at least. So we have the ingenuity we see. Yeah? The ingenuity we see in science, you live with this now. Your life depends on this. And yet, we're still, when it comes to war, we are able and can. There is a disconnect somehow between our social behavior and our scientific amazing advancement. And that's, I think, I can't understand it, but that is where I'm saying we need to change if we can. On sanctions, I think sanctions, of course, I mean, politics is always carrot and a stick at the end if you simplify it. You give some carrots, but you also have a little stick. And you can, of course, use sanctions, but they are not. Don't think that sanction is going to solve your problem. And we don't have sanctions that are what we have seen in, say, in Iraq and other places. Dumb sanctions, when you are hurting the civilians and not the people in power. Sanction, if you see in Iraq, like 500,000 people died, children, because they didn't have enough food because of sanction, while Mr. Saddam Hussein and company have gotten enriched. That's what, then people start to talk about some smart sanction, targeting sanction. I agree. I mean, you need it, but it has to be, again, sanctioned within, if ideally, within illegitimacy, within the Security Council, and not individual sanctions. That's not what's happening, but it shouldn't be individual. It shouldn't be, I am powerful, so I adopt sanction there, and it doesn't by itself solve the issue. Sanction has been developed in a situation when there is a democracy, and you apply sanction, so people will change the ruler. In 99% of the cases, when you apply sanction, you apply it in a dictatorship, where people have no voice to change the situation. And all it does, as we have seen, is that people in power, through black market or whatever, make more money. And in addition, you raise a sense of nationalism also, which, people become, we are under attack. And of course, leaders are very good at doing that. So they forgot all their differences with their leaders, and it becomes a defense of motherland. So, what I'm saying is sanction is an important tool, but we have to see how we use it in a smart way. Sweden and Finland, I mean, of course, they have decided that. What are other countries? I mean, I think what are other countries like you or Switzerland or others who are neutral by law or neutral by treaty or opted to be neutral? And that, it's a difficult situation. It's a difficult situation because the idea that I still think that some countries are more protected than others is not right. It's not right at all. And you are forcing countries who have opted to be neutral to think their neutrality, frankly. To think their, because at the end of the day, my survival dominate. My survival has to be number one. So I hope we are not reaching that point because we need a new global order, there's no question. How that, I mean, we keep, President Biden and others keep saying we need to build back better. But I think we need a whole new structure. It's not just building back better. The current building is not good. The current structure is not good. We need a new structure, starting by the basics: equality, trust, solidarity, human. There's a lot. Tolerance, governance. But we are. If you ask me, where are we going to be a year from today? I have no idea. Unless I rely on our luck, basically. Last question, I think, was civil nuclear. Well, of course, yes, you can. I mean, nuclear, I think, is having a second life right now with nuclear power because it's climate change. It's a clean source of energy. Technology is developing. Technology is becoming safer. I think in 10 years from now, you will see a different kind of nuclear power reactors, small and modular power reactors that are safer, and easier to deal with. But particularly in the area of safety, does not, explode, does not. But whether you have to separate the civilian from the military, yes, you can. That's what I talked about, the multinationalization of the fuel cycle. To develop a weapon, you have to have enriched uranium or plutonium. And this part of the nuclear has to be under international control. That's what, my idea and some other. Then separate this. No country should have its hand on enrichment facilities or reprocessing. This would be multinational, kept controlled by a number of countries. So you can. There's always solutions, because if we want a solution, and if one solution based on equity, we have the imagination, we have the ingenuity, but it's a question: are we ready as human beings to be treated as equal? That's the last question I leave with you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Dr. ElBaradei, I really want to thank you so much. You did not only show us your competence and your personal commitment to peace that everybody could feel. You also gave us an impression, that, also the point of view in other global regions might be different to ours. But as far as I see it, still, this does not mean that everybody or everything is relative. And I would say, you mentioned that India was respected from the moment when it got nuclear weapons.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, okay, but it is a fact. And if you take it the other side, that Ukraine was ready to give away its nuclear weapons it had. Sure. And the deal was that it got more or less in the Budapest memorandum, also the commitment of the big powers and also the Russians for integrity, for territorial integrity. And therefore, not only the aggressive invasion. But in such a case, I mean, the threat of a nuclear weapon, the use of a nuclear weapon, is something nobody can tolerate. Nobody. And where really the whole world, as far as I see it, has to stand up and to make it clear this cannot work.
Absolutely. But you need to reach out to the rest of the world. That's what the rest of the world is somewhere else.
I absolutely agree about that. What you said in addition, you know, that of course we do have a lack of global government at the moment. I mean, when the most important members, permanent members of Security Council, go into war, into even if it's not declared, but only declared as military, special military operation, you know, then of course the question is where the whole community has to end. And I also want to maybe make another short remark. I'm convinced that democracies at the end do act in at least a little bit in a different way, because there are at least more limits to power than in authoritarian states. And insofar, I think, when we discuss it, we should not forget it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Well, I should tell you that I'm 100% believer that without democracy we are doomed.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.